Hi class, so let's review, I'll just go through an overview rather of chapter 13, yeah 13, I just had to check, to make sure that you know what you're getting into this week with the respiratory system. Last week's chapter was very physiology intense and it was very abstract because of all of that immune system stuff. This week is more, is less conceptual. You can relate to it because you know how you breathe. You can feel yourself breathe, so it's a little bit more relatable. So all of the anatomy is reviewed on that diagram, figure 13.1, what are the pages, 372, 373, and you'll go over that in lab when you cover the respiratory system, which is hopefully either this week or next week. I'm not familiar with their lab schedule. Typically the lab and lecture schedules for this class don't meet up week per week, but it's helpful when you can look at these structures. So the figure that's on page 374 goes through the sequence of bronchioles that are within the respiratory system, starting with the largest and then the last. That sequence is important to understand, so maybe recopy that that little purple box there over and over again, the sequence charted out. That way you can relate all of those terms together. And then the anatomy of the alveolus, all of the different types of cells that make up the alveolus, very important to understand there. Then you need to get into the actual breathing process, figure 13.3 on page 376. Not all the page numbers are labeled, so it confuses me sometimes. That's a great chart there to diagram out. Recopy it or redraw it if you like to draw. I think the idea of inhaling, the muscles that are acting, exhaling are very important, as well as the atmospheric and alveolar pressures that are diagrammed out there. It's important to understand the pressure because everything moves from high pressure to low pressure. So if you understand the pressures, then you'll understand where things are moving. I never answer my house phone. It's a telemarketer, I'm sure. Then on page 377, again, it's showing you the specific muscles that are acting here as you're inhaling and exhaling. It's important to understand which muscles do which. Then it beefs up the complexity there on page 379, where we're talking about lung volumes and lung capacities. So if you look at that graph, that little zigzag line that's over and over and over again, that's just your resting breathing called tidal breathing. You breathe out, you breathe in, you're naturally doing it, you don't think about it. Then when you take a deep breath, you inhale a lot and you exhale a lot. That's what those little peaks and valleys on the graph are showing you. They all have different terms, they all have different values, and they're different for males and females. You should be familiar with the general values that are listed here on this graph. They're important to understand. It's also important to understand what can affect those capacities, all of those disorders, COPD, emphysema, bronchitis, etc., that are listed at the bottom of that page. Moving into how gases are exchanged, that's on page 383. There's a wonderful little graph there. It is, or a chart rather, it's not really a sequence because everything's happening at once. So I suggest redrawing and recreating this and seeing if you can come up with your own caption, seeing if you can make sense of it as you redraw it. So for instance, that little alveoli at the top, it's showing you the pulmonary capillaries, how it goes back to the heart and then out from the heart and then to the body and then back to the heart. So it puts the cardiovascular system together for you, so you can see how the cardiovascular system plays a role in the respiratory system and vice versa. It's important to understand in this diagram not only the sequence of airflow, but I mentioned those pressures. Here we are going to see partial pressures of oxygen and carbon dioxide, both in the alveoli, at the tissue level, and within the heart. It's important to understand what those values are, again, so you can understand where the air is going to flow. It always goes from high to low, high concentration to low concentration, or high pressure to low pressure. So that's very, very important to understand. That is a really great diagram for you. You'll then see the transport of carbon dioxide and how oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported on page 384. That's super important to understand how they get around in your blood. They don't just go in your blood and the blood takes it for a little ride. There's a couple of different ways that oxygen and carbon dioxide can be transported, and it's important to understand all of them. On page 385, you'll see all of the activities that go on during internal and external respiration. Again, super important chart, very important to understand showing you what's going on inside the hemoglobin as the exchange process is taking place. Very, very important. Then you get into brain controls. There's a great graphic organizer there on page 387. You can recopy this, or you can just recreate it, make it a little different. You can just have medulla oblongata and pons at the top, and then break them down into inspiratory and expiratory centers, and show how each of them play a role in inspiration and expiration. Then finally you get into the nervous system control and how the regulation happens with a good old feedback loop on page 389. Again, just sequencing that out, redrawing it out, maybe even labeling the steps and mixing them up on the note cards like I like to do so much. And then we get into disease and aging with the respiratory system. Just like everything, it slows down. It's not as efficient as we get older and older, unfortunately. So that is chapter 13 for you. Please let me know if you have any questions, and good luck this week on your test. See ya.